Sorry, I didn't mean to get Pete on your ass. I disavow. That didn't happen. I didn't say that. All right.
Then retract.
Retracted. All right. Hi, everyone. Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you're doing well. We're about to embark on what I hope is a fantastic and informative exclusive conversation with the one and only Kristin Hayter, producer, obviously a producer of her own music, co-producer of her own music, singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, someone who wears many hats now that they are, effectively running their own label too, as well, which we will talk about. That and the new record that you have coming up, Saved, which is going to be dropping in November, correct?
Actually, in like 2 weeks, I think.
In like 2 weeks.
October 20th or 22nd. Something like that.
Okay, so before the month is even out, there's a lot coming up. You also have this Carnegie gig that I want to talk about as well. So, I feel like so much has changed between the last time we spoke and now. And I feel like a good deal of at least the front end of this interview is going to be just like me just saying why, to a lot. To a lot of these things, just to kind of get you to obviously spell them out, because I know you've explained some of these changes recently, but not all of them, or not all of your explanations actually reach people's ears a lot of the time, or sometimes there's confusion between point A and point B, or sometimes it feels like there's an elaborate game of telephone going on the internet when you're telling people things and kind of, revealing your motivations behind why certain things are different or changing and so on and so forth. So to kind of do this off the bat and maybe get the most obvious shift out of the way. Why from this point forward go, as a performing artist under just kind of your own name, as opposed to, kind of holding on to the Lingua Ignota name and brand that people have known you for up until this point?
Yeah. The past couple years have been really important for me to just figure out my life, figure out myself, and move on from a bunch of painful shit. And so I decided that the project Lingy was no longer felt urgent to do. It felt like I was trying to do a lot of internal work and make myself better, and having to continuously be stuck in that cycle of performance and doing that music was extremely complicated and difficult to keep doing. So it was just time to move on. It also kind of stopped being challenging. I became really, I guess, boring and painful was the death knell for Lingy for me, in that I knew what devices and what conceits worked for Lingua, and it was no longer something. It became like second nature, and it was no longer super challenging for me. So I wanted to, as I was trying to find value in myself, to take back my given name and to start performing under my given name, jazzed up a little bit with the Rev, which is I was ordained in about 5 minutes in a Spring Hill Suites online outside of Nashville, Tennessee, while I was on tour. So anybody can become a minister or a reverend, essentially. So it's just about moving forward and wanting to really kind of reclaim my own name, I think.
Mm-hmm. And the Rev, is that something you see yourself kind of sticking with for just kind of the current album cycle, given what we're seeing are kind of the themes of the current record that you're about to put out? Or do you see yourself like kind of holding on to that going forward with even albums beyond this one?
It might go forward. I'm honestly not sure. I'm kind of just taking everything as it comes right now. We'll see how it goes, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And, to sort of be explicit about it, we're not just talking about putting your past musical pen name to rest. You're also kind of like leaving the material of that era behind as well, in terms of still performing it and everything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, it's all like I'm not performing Lingua anymore. I'm doing my final performances are in London next week, actually. So I'm happy to fulfill those obligations, but I'm also just like really ready to be done. Yeah.
And, speaking of, I guess, kind of becoming a little disillusioned with the project and the material and what you're kind of seeing as like, a lack of a challenge there. What do you see now are kind of the challenges facing you with the current record and the name change? I mean, what kind of things are you attempting to do that you find challenging at this moment or exciting about continuing to make music and continuing to put, records out?
Doing things going back to DIY has been a big challenge. It has been also a really exciting challenge. And it's something that like I've always been sort of an outsider and never really felt like I belonged in the industry. And don't necessarily have the personality to be part of this industry, but I wanted to figure out how I could continue to make music while like not participating in a lot of stuff that I don't like very much anymore. So creating the label Perpetual Flame Ministries and kind of having a lot more control over what it is I'm doing, while also, you know, being more involved is more of a challenge. Things aren't as spelled out for you. And I'm lucky that I have my buddy KW who does a lot of the logistical aspect of the label and everything. So that has been challenging. It's also challenging in that, like, as I mentioned before, the language of Lingua Ignota became kind of second nature, and it was also something that I was able to. It had like a lot of resource material behind it, and a couple of years of performing in the DIY scene, cutting my teeth, and in front of like 40 people, and nobody cared what was going on. So I was able to do a lot of like really experiment with the project to get the tone right. And that's not really an option now. I'm kind of going into it like with some degree of recognition and need to make sure that the tone is correct kind of out of the gate. And there's been some confusion so far already, which I anticipated, but it will all work itself out.
When you're speaking of like the language of your music and the language of the project, like what are you referring to specifically? Like the things that you're saying or the artistic language and aesthetics of what you're doing, and what do you feel like you're leaving behind and embracing now instead with this new record?
Yeah, I'm talking about both. I'm talking about like the thematic material as well as kind of the aesthetics and all of the devices that served to augment the thematic material and to make that visible. I'm leaving behind the stuff that I think Lingy was most known for, which was like the dealing with themes of abuse and trauma and like untenable suffering, and moving into talking about healing, sort of, but in like a very ugly way. The thing is, I'm still the same person, so I still think about making artwork the same way, but I'm choosing to use like a different set of references now, and a different like different materials somewhat, although I do still, there is a through line for sure.
I guess let's talk about some of those through lines, but also some of those differences. I mean, one of the things that I'll say going through the new album that I've noticed, and I think any fan is going to notice once they hear the entire record, is just how raw and stark and somewhat lo-fi and stripped back a lot of the music is in comparison with all of those like really thick, noisy, ornate pieces that you were dropping, especially on Sinner Get Ready. What caused you to go in that very high contrast, very simple, not in a sort of insulting way, but almost like, kind of basic, rudimentary, back to basic sort of direction with the, musical arrangements on this album.
Yeah. The record is meant to be very stripped back, meant to be very stark, meant to be like austere, and also to be noisy without having much noise in it, technically. And so the focus is really kind of on the material, and the reason that it is lo-fi and focusing on the material is that I wanted to document the process of getting saved. I wanted to document the process of religious conversion through the evangelical tradition. And it was an earnest attempt to do so through this record. And unsure whether I succeeded or not, but I wanted to create a sense of like objectivity and a kind of documentary feel to it, that you would hear in like a Folkways recording or like a Smithsonian recording or a recording by like Alan Lomax or something. And that was definitely the like the sonic palette that we were working with. Was like, I wanted to sound like a musicologist recorded this in like the 30s or the 40s, and that it's been lost to the annals of time for the past 100 years or some shit.
Right.
That was definitely the objective too. And so it's less about, for me, like the individual songs themselves and more about the documentation of the process.
Yes. I'm gonna say yes, because like I heard it and I was like, I bet she's doing this. And I was like, because this sounds like some kind of like anthropological project,
exactly.
Where you've like stumbled across some kind of like in the sticks Christian cult, and they make this certain kind of music or whatever, and you're just like kind of rough recording it just to document it, to have some kind of like, historical, proof of it existing or doing whatever at one point.
Exactly.
So with that, and with, the name you're attaching to the record and everything like that, I mean, there's a lot of theatrics involved, I guess I'll say. It's obviously stripped back in comparison with some of your recent stuff, but it seems like it's just as theatrical in some ways, because like, I mean, you're not literally living in a Christian cult in the middle of the woods, so it's like, how are you kind of putting yourself in that world and that mindset to where you're embodying it, and writing songs from that perspective in a way, if that's pointed enough of a question.
Yeah. So this project originally, the concept for it was to record as many hymns as possible, and with the hope that in the repetition of hymns, I would find salvation in some capacity. And so there are about 3 hours of music total, and other material that I don't want to spoil for people necessarily at this point, but so it is like a fairly scopy, large amount of stuff that we committed to tape, and it created, doing so many of these hymns created a sense of madness in me, I think. And for some parts of the record, I tried to evoke like a personal transcendental experience by fasting a bit, or sleep deprivation a bit, or having Seth just like blare stuff at me in the studio for an extended period of time to see what would happen. So yeah, it was, there was some preparation, and I also, went to a lot of worship services at various Pentecostal churches to kind of see what was happening and what it sounded like. And so there was definitely a lot of prep, a lot of like reading doomsday literature. Like I have thousands of doomsday Christian pamphlets that I've gotten off of eBay at this point. Like just lots of lots.
So you yourself are being kind of anthropological about it, about the whole process.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Definitely. And that's one of my favorite things about art making is like the research component and, you know, figuring out how things work and putting them together.
You're kind of talking about it, something I want to kind of contrast with our last conversation, you know, given what you're talking about in terms of like the place that faith plays in your creative process with this, and kind of like the idea of conversion and so on and so forth. Like with the last record you put out, or at least after the last record you put out, when we talked about sort of like Christianity and spirituality as kind of like, you know, an abstract thing, at that point, you more or less had this attitude, you're like, kind of iffy on the faith thing at the moment. You know, has that changed for you much at this point after this process, or just after everything that has transpired in, you know, the time since we last spoke?
I think it definitely has, but I still don't know what's going on. It sounds like such a cop out. I feel like I really should have like a definitive answer, but I don't. I still don't know, but I definitely have a much more, a much more open sense of what God is and what God can be at this point. And I think that my work, in particular, this work is intending to engage with that question, intending to ask that question of myself and of my listener as well, I think.
You know, I wanted to ask you about kind of the writing and recording process with these songs too, because obviously you're doing so much research into this music, and you know, you're looking into all these hymns, you're learning these hymns. You also, prior to this, had been doing these kind of like double build performances where you would kind of come out and play all of this Lingua material, but then prior to that, you would do like this kind of straightforward, you know, singing and piano performance where you're just doing like hymns and stuff like that. You know, at what point, you know, do you feel like in the creative process of this record, you know, I guess like where's, I guess the border between, you know, the material that you're borrowing from or originality here? Because I imagine like in the process of making these tracks, you're almost like sampling, you know, you're sort of like borrowing certain chord progressions or like lyrical themes or, you know, ideas. Like, you know, how did you personally feel like when you were gathering all of these ideas and all these materials, but then, you know, having to put your own spin on them in a way to sort of like make these tracks?
Yeah. I mean, technically, I would say that this record is split pretty evenly between originals that I wrote and hymns. But at the same time, I don't know if I can say that the originals are really originals. The really fascinating thing about hymns to me is that often they are pieces of music that go back to, I mean, ones that we know, and often, you know, some of the ones that I sing on this record, they go back to like the 1800s or the 1700s, and sometimes their origin can't be traced, but a lot of times they go back to Sacred Heart music, or they go back to African American spirituals. And so,
right, and they've evolved over time in terms of like, you know, the various renditions of them as well.
Exactly. And so they change context, and their meaning changes demographically and sociopolitically, and
so that's essentially what I'm getting at, because that's something that people don't necessarily understand about hymns in general. It's like they don't always understand that there's not necessarily like a known writer for a lot of them. And you could find a very popular hymn, and if you look into it, you could find dozens, maybe at minimum, of different versions of the same song over and over and over.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you know, in effect, you're pretty much just doing that, but for yourself on this record in a lot of ways.
Essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, at what point, I guess, or I guess what I want to ask maybe specifically to kind of get into one of the teasers is like, All My Friends Are Going to Hell. Like, that track, for example, how much of that song do you feel like is like, here are my original thoughts or points or sort of like perspectives, my own stories that I'm putting into the track. How much of it is that as opposed to I'm just like kind of just pulling apart a bunch of pieces of car in a junkyard and just like assembling them into a new piece, because it's, again, kind of go through that process, because I think a lot of people don't really, again, know that background about hymns in the way that you do.
Yeah, I mean, so All of My Friends is a little bit of a special case. That one is definitely an original.
Yeah.
But that a lot of the kind of the narrative arc of it comes from like 50s fire and brimstone songs by people like the Louvin brothers, and their songs like The Christian Life or the Kneeling Drunkard's Plea, like those kinds of things that are about, verse, chorus, verse that substantiate like someone has sinned and then this other person has sinned and then this other person has sinned but I have also sinned,
right.
But I am in the process of repenting and changing. And so that's like a pretty common arc that you'll hear in those kinds of songs. And the music itself, came from me. I'm not exactly sure what it's based on, but it does definitely pull from that specific place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's kind of rewind a bit, because I wanted to ask you about like other things that kind of make this new era different for you, because I think to most people who kind of look at your art and look at what you do in kind of a very surface level way, they're going to see that, like, between this record and the last record, Christianity and spirituality obviously play major themes,
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, these are very different eras and projects for you personally, like digging past that. And maybe also kind of the mention of kind of suffering earlier that you were talking about. Like, what other things do you feel like, kind of make what you're doing now different from anything that you've done before up until this point?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a good place personally and mentally, which is very new for me. So I changed so much about my life and about myself to try to figure out how to value myself as a person. And I moved and I live in this insane house that's trying to kill me now. And I love it very much. And
that's
I
a good
have
relationship with where you live. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a really, really wonderful, sweet partner who treats me very well. And all of the kind of bad stuff that was in my life is gone. So I'm well and I feel comfortable and happy and pretty content. And so this music definitely comes from a different place mentally, for sure.
Sorry, I was distracted. People in chat are very much aware of your lore, and somebody wanted you to say if you have anything to, shed light upon with this. They wanted to know about your coal room.
Yeah.
Yeah. And any comments on the room full of coal?
Yeah, it is a room full of coal. It is, so the basement is a fairly standard Victorian basement, which means that it was a workspace in the 1800s and that it was very heavily trafficked and frequented by like the servant class. And so it has like a bunch of different rooms that have different purposes, including there's a room that has a meat smoker, which is terrifying. And the coal room, I assume, was full of coal and continues to be full of coal. And I used it as as the setting for the record. It's a basement record, basically. Like I set up a whole doomsday bunker down there and everything. So,
and all these things are good because now you just have your own servants who work these various apparatuses and rooms now.
Yeah, the spirits of servants past definitely
okay.
are.
Well, I mean, they're spirits. Okay. Well, I mean, you should still pay them a fair wage. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so getting back to what you're talking about here. Okay, so you're in a much better place when kind of like, creating this record and making this music, but it still seems like, at least from the material that you've teased forward so far, that like in a sense, you're still accessing a certain type of pain or darkness. You know what I mean? Like, how do you feel, I guess, like, being in a more positive place, but still maybe feeling at least like that pull to, express something in your art that might be a little dark or a little, unfortunate, like your friends all going to hell. I guess like with things feeling better, what still pulls you back into that place where you kind of like, want to get into those darker ideas?
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever be making like legitimately joyful music. That's just not.
There's not like a Walking on Sunshine cover on the bonus, on the deluxe.
I don't think so, sadly.
On the deluxe edition of the record, you're telling me
Give me
like
another few years.
what the hell are we doing here? That's not going to be on the deluxe of the record.
Yeah, so healing is ugly.
Right.
I've found it's ugly, and it's not. I've always fucking hated that word healing, and I hate the language of pop psychology and how it's so like prevalent now. But like, we think of healing in terms of like this very kind of socially acceptable self-gentleness, self-care, yada yada yada, whatever. And I mean, which all of that's valid for sure. But
no, you don't have to preface it. I mean, it's like, let the headlines come. Kristin Hayter takes on the pop psychology community.
No.
The flood of Instagram posts come flying in.
No, I just have found that there have been very beautiful things about it, and there have been very ugly things about it, very ugly realizations, and very like it's been kind of an ugly process. And if and so the parable I created for that, or the analogy I created for that, was this evangelical conversion, was personal transcendental experience, was reaching to God in kind of the most extreme ways possible. And so yeah, that is where that kind of comes from. I don't think I think healing is very different for everyone, and for me it has been painful at times. So yeah.
Do terms like self-care make you wince?
They do.
Oh, they do. Do you do anything for self-care? No.
Pony game.
Pony game. Does that get a shout out on the album, Healing Through Nurturing the Pony?
It sadly does not. The liner notes are very strange for this record, but I'll say it now. Like, shout out to Star Stable for and all of my ponies in my stable.
Let me ask about the formation of the label for a little bit. I mean, how does it feel to kind of like, distance yourself a little bit from the record label machine and just kind of, be doing it under your own name, your own brand, your own thing? I mean, is it easier in some ways? Is it harder in some ways? Like, what have the pros and cons of that proven to be so far?
Yeah, it has been easier and harder, both, definitely. We don't have the capital of a record label necessarily, so everything is coming out of our own pocket, and we've put all of our stuff into this, and and it has also, you know, it's been a challenge to kind of like get going, to find distribution, to, you know, do all that stuff. And we're very lucky to have found like Secretly Canadian, for instance, and to find people who are willing to work with us and to take a chance on us, even though we're new and green. But it is such like, you know, my objective has never been to be like, to be famous. My objective has always been to make weird, challenging stuff. And I could have, you know, post Sinner Get Ready, gone to a large label or done something, you know, done something else. And there are certainly people who do that, and like, credit to them. But for me, like, that's not what I want. I want to be in control of my stuff and doing exactly what I want to do. And this is that.
So, I mean, at this point, I'm sure it's kind of like, you know, a monkey off of your back to not be sort of like worrying about what your relationship with a label is, you know, in regards to how your music sounds or how you're putting out your art or anything like that. But like, there's still that relationship that you have with your audience, which, I mean, over the years has proven to certainly be like an intense one, you know?
Yes.
How do you feel like that has kind of like progressed up until this point? Because, I mean, there's a lot of layers to it, you know, from what I've observed. And I don't know if there are many artists out there that, you know, have the connection with their listeners that you do, you know, because I mean, you know, people fucking pass out at your shows, you know, over the emotional intensity of what you do and what they perceive in what you do. You know, there are people that follow you around and look at you almost like you're a cult leader, you know, and simultaneously, you know, there are elements of that you embrace. There are elements of that you also, I think, try to dispel too, by being personable online and being silly and not taking yourself too seriously as well. And, you know, I think also recently with the release of that kind of mini documentary of your tour, you tried to also kind of humanize yourself a bit in the eyes of the people that follow you and what you do. Like, you know, how do you feel like people are kind of perceiving you at this moment as an artist and with this name change? And how might you think they'll take your kind of, you know, change with this new album musically?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, and I honestly am not sure. We'll see what happens. But you know, I think with Lingua, like, people tended to think, you know, not knowing me, people would think that I'm this like inscrutable demon. And the reality is that my personality is like 95% quietly trying to manage my terror, and the other 5% is like goofy little goober. Like, I'm just a goofball. And you know, my music came from a lot of pain, but that's not where I necessarily want to be. And so yeah, it has been like a very intense relationship with my fan base, and I really care a lot about them. I know that my music has resonated with them for a reason. And but I think I wanted to show them a way through. And I think I didn't want to let like, you know, the note of like the last couple years be the note that I wanted to leave everybody on. Like, I didn't want to, you know, disappear and be like, well, fuck my life. I'm, you know, but I wanted to be like, I feel like if I can do anything good, I can show people that they're, you know, no matter how hopeless you feel, no matter how alone you feel, no matter how, you know, fucked up things have been for you, you can find your way through. And it doesn't have to be the way that I've found, but, you know, I've been in such hopeless places where I thought I would never get out. And I want to show that you can. And so I hope, and actually, like, there are a few songs on this record that I wrote specifically for my fan base that are actually kind of love letters to them in a way. That, you know, may this comfort and protect you. And a couple others that I had either like a specific group of people or specific people in mind, who I've either just met briefly or come to know over the years. And so, the thing is for me and it is for you as well. So, you know, I'm not sure how people will respond. And I don't spend very much time on social media these days because it fucking terrifies me. So I'm not as engaged as I was, but I still, really care.
What other relationships or connections do some of the other tracks on this record speak to that you might be willing to kind of, share with us outside of that audience connection that you just mentioned?
Yeah. I mean, mostly it's just about trying to find God, I think, and find myself. There's so many ways of there's so many fragmentations of the self on this record, and so many kind of like intense emotional twistings that happen, to try to get to the root of the self, I think. I don't think there's necessarily anyone else that it's about, really.
Okay. All right. How do you feel like this change in what you're doing with this album might impact as far as like, the live performances that you're going to be doing under, this name going forward? Will it look roughly like, what you were doing with those very straightforward kind of hymn performances, or will there be like some additions to that or some add-ons?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out now. I'm working through a bunch of different ideas, trying to figure out how to recreate like the texture of the record and the sonics of the record, and how to create a sort of intensive storytelling process in the performances, without being like too straightforward about it. So I'm like diving back into my performance art, conceptual art, worlds, and like thinking about how to best convey some of these ideas. I don't think it will necessarily be as straightforward as past hymn performances, but it's definitely not going to be like self-flagellating with shop lights anymore. So I mean, we shall see. Yeah, trying to figure out how I really want to focus on the music and focus on the voice. So I think there will be a lot of just like, I think these performances will be a little bit more musical than prior performances. But again, we'll see. I tend to kind of like work things out as I go. So we'll see.
Kind of also speaking to that process, in Chicago, not too long ago, you recently sort of held your own festival event, multi-day festival event. How do you feel like the process of that, sort of like went overall? What were some of the takeaways, and are you planning on, doing it again as well?
Mm-hmm. We are planning on doing another Perpetual Flame festival. I mean, technically, the upcoming London shows is Perpetual Flame.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not.
Okay.
I believe we're doing it again next year. But yeah, we did. We did a tent revival show on the Sunday, or two of them, which was what I was trying to do was a structural reenactment of a tent revival service. And also trying to play a couple new songs to see, like, to test them out and to see how they went. But it was kind of the issue of what I was talking about in the very beginning, where it's like, I was kind of throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall for those, and I didn't quite nail the tone. And they were definitely supposed to be kind of their own entity, and aren't supposed to be like what the new performances are going to be. But it was a very interesting process to try to do, like, okay, can I do a sermon? Maybe. can I save people? Should I save people? I don't know. Like at this point, doing that for the first time in front of, a few hundred people, and seeing what worked and seeing what didn't was really, really interesting. And so I did look at a bunch of people's like feedback about that. And I was like, yeah, I agree with like, we didn't quite nail the tone there. But, so yeah, going forward, it's helpful to hear, what people think to some extent so that I can course correct when necessary. But overall, like it was an incredible festival. It was really wild to do like Caligula stuff and then do Sinner stuff and then do like this wild unhinged tent revival service. And to see like all of my friends play who are all so incredibly talented. It was really wonderful. And to like have the community there, and we finished it off with like a new metal karaoke, which was just delightful. It's just such a nice way to end the weekend. God, some people crushed it. Absolutely crushed it.
In terms of like, the revival sort of thing, is that something you see yourself kind of taking a whack at again? And when you do see yourself doing that, how much of it in your own mind is like, I'm making a genuine attempt at this, as opposed to like, this is just like merely a performance and it's like, me embodying something?
Yeah, I definitely, my objective is not to bring people to Jesus, necessarily. But I want to perhaps show what goes into trying to create a transcendental state. So I will have to work on that and think about it more over the next bunch of months and see how like the future performances go as we're planning touring and stuff before maybe taking another stab at a revival. 'Cause yeah, it's a lot. So.
Okay. Before the album comes out toward the end of the month, is there anything else that we need to be looking out for in terms of like more singles or like visuals or anything like that? As far as this rollout goes, are we just waiting on the record?
We're waiting on the record at this point. We're doing a new special edition vinyl for Bandcamp Friday tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But other than that, like we're trucking along, and yeah, it's coming.
And
the end is here.
I mean, as far as like all the other material that you were talking about that you sort of like, were recording and documenting and exploring throughout this process. I mean, I imagine it was kind of difficult to, end up whittling it all down to 11 tracks, like, is there any point at which, the fans may end up seeing like some of that extra stuff or anything else that was like kind of left on the cutting room floor in the process of this album?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. That's common.
And, do you foresee it sort of being, kind of released in tandem with or in connection with like this album, or do you see it kind of like being rolled into another project, just kind of, that's kind of its own thing down the road?
We're not entirely sure yet. We're trying to figure that out, and what makes sense, because it is so much music, and I kind of feel like I want to do more. So right. We'll see what happens to it. But it will definitely find its way out there.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, listen, I appreciate you coming through and being an open book and giving us an idea of how to kind of conceptualize the album as we're listening to it when it comes out in a few weeks.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me aboard tonight.
I appreciate you coming through again, and no problem. You're always invited back here, even if a few days after the album comes out, you want to say more stuff about it, just let me know.
Thank you.
And if you want to say more about it 2 days after that, I mean, I might be a little hesitant, but we'll still have you on. Just let me know.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you later. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.